My name is Sarah, and for 25 years, my whole world revolved around just one person, my son, Ethan. I was only 19 when I had him, really, just a kid myself. His father left before Ethan even took his first breath, leaving me with a broken heart and this tiny, fragile life to protect. I made a promise to that little boy, a vow I whispered over his crib in our cramped, drafty apartment. I promised I would shield him from the kind of pain I'd known. I promised he would never feel abandoned, never feel worthless, and for most of his life, I really thought I'd kept that promise. I poured every bit of myself into him, working 2, sometimes 3 jobs, just to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. His scraped knees were my emergencies, his dreams were my ambitions. Every milestone, his first steps, his high school graduation, the day he got into college, I collected them like treasures, proof that all my sacrifices were worth it. But a promise can be a fragile thing, and I never, ever imagined that the person who would shatter mine, the one who would make me feel more abandoned and worthless than anyone ever had, would be the very boy I'd given everything to protect. The note had just 6 words, scrawled on the back of an old bank receipt. We took the money. Ethan needs it. It wasn't a stranger who left it there on my empty kitchen counter. It was my son. He left me with a goodbye that felt more like a robbery and a heart that was completely broken. He chose his new wife over the mother who had spent her entire life sacrificing for him. But what he never knew, what he couldn't possibly understand as he drained my life savings, was that the everything he thought he was walking away from was secretly worth millions. Raising Ethan by myself in a city as expensive as San Diego was a battle I fought every single day. There were years when our dinner was nothing more than toast and tea, and nights I'd stay up patching the holes in his only pair of jeans until my fingers were raw. I'll never forget the winter he came down with a terrible fever. The doctor's bills were more than I made in a month. Without a second thought, I sold the only piece of jewelry I had left from my own mother, a simple gold locket, just to pay for his medicine. Seeing him get better was the only payment I ever needed. I worked as a cleaner, scrubbing the floors of offices for people who never even bothered to learn my name. I'd come home long after he was asleep, smelling like bleach, and I'd just stand there and watch him, this perfect boy who was my entire reason for being. I saved every single spare dollar, not for me, but for his future. I put him through college with a mix of scholarships, loans, and the tiny savings I'd scraped together over 2 decades. I never bought myself a new coat. I never went on vacation. I never even treated myself to a nice meal. My life was just a long list of deferred dreams, and I was happy to let them go for him. He was going to have the life I never could. He was my masterpiece. When he graduated, smiling from that stage, I felt a pride so deep it brought tears to my eyes. I'd done it. My boy was safe. He was successful. My promise was fulfilled, or so I thought. Then, Tiffany showed up. Ethan met her in his last year of college, and from the second he brought her home, I felt everything shift. She looked around my small, humble apartment with a polite smile that couldn't hide her disgust. She came from money, and she wore it like a suit of armor. Her clothes were designer, her handbag cost more than my monthly rent, and she talked endlessly about European vacations and country clubs. It was clear she didn't see me as the woman who built the man she loved from nothing. To her, I was just an obstacle, a piece of a past he needed to get rid of. At first, Ethan really tried to bridge the gap. But Tiffany's influence was like a slow-acting poison. Soon, my calls started going straight to voicemail. Our weekly dinners became monthly, and then they just stopped. "Tiffany thinks it's a bit much, Mom," he'd say, his voice tight with an apology he didn't even seem to mean. "She says we need to build our own life." The woman who had never worked a day in her life was teaching my son to be ashamed of the mother who had never stopped working. The final blow came about a year after their wedding. They were buying a ridiculous condo, one they couldn't possibly afford. I had a small savings account with about $10,000 in it. It was every spare penny I had managed to put away over 25 years. It wasn't much, but it was my security blanket. One morning, I went to the bank to get some cash, and my card was declined. The teller looked at me with pity in her eyes as she explained the account had been emptied the day before. Ethan was still a joint signer on the account, a detail from his college days I'd never thought to change. He had taken all of it. And on the counter, where my little emergency fund jar used to be, there was that note. We took the money. Ethan needs it. The cruelty of it took my breath away. He didn't even have the courage to say it to my face. He and his wife bled me dry, and then just vanished, leaving me with nothing but 6 heartless words. The grief was a physical weight. It felt like he had died. What Ethan and Tiffany never knew, what nobody knew, was that the $10,000 they stole was just my day-to-day money for groceries and bills. It was nothing. My real security, my real secret, was tucked away in a dusty old lockbox. It was a land deed, left to me by my grandmother. For years, it was just a piece of paper, representing a forgotten stretch of coastal land nobody wanted. My grandmother always told me, "Don't you ever sell this land, Sarah. Land is the only thing they're not making more of." So I held on to it. Through all the lean years, through all the desperate nights I wondered how I'd feed my son, I never even considered selling it. It was my one connection to my own family, my one secret hope for a future that wasn't just a struggle. And over the decades, as San Diego grew and expanded, that forgotten piece of land became prime real estate. A few years ago, developers started calling, and their offers got more and more absurd. That worthless patch of dirt was now valued at over $15 million. While I kept living in my tiny apartment and scrubbing floors to pay my rent, Ethan and Tiffany were all over social media, living the high life. They posted endless pictures of extravagant parties, fancy cars, and designer clothes. They were burning through my $10,000 and whatever else they could get their hands on, completely oblivious. They saw me as a poor, pathetic old woman they had thankfully left behind. They had no idea that they were the ones who were truly poor, living a fantasy, while I was sitting on a fortune that could buy and sell their world 10 times over. I didn't touch the money. I just kept the deed in the box, a silent promise of a different kind of future, one where I was no longer a victim. About 2 years after they vanished from my life, the inevitable happened. The frantic phone call came on a rainy Thursday night. It was Ethan. His voice was a mess, choked with panic. Tiffany's family had cut them off. Their reckless spending had finally caught up to them, and the lifestyle they had built on debt and my stolen savings had crumbled. They were facing foreclosure. Their cars were being repossessed, and they were about to lose everything. "Mom," he sobbed into the phone. The word felt strange and bitter in my ears. "We need your help. We have nowhere else to go. Can we borrow some money? Just to get back on our feet?" I was silent for a long moment, just listening to the sound of his panic. "Come over, Ethan," I said, my voice surprisingly calm and steady. "We should talk about this in person." An hour later, they were standing in my living room. They both looked exhausted and defeated. Tiffany couldn't even look at me, her usual arrogance gone, replaced by a quiet resentment. Ethan, my son, just looked like a scared little boy again. "Mom, I am so sorry," he started, launching into some rehearsed speech about his mistakes. Tiffany just stood behind him, silent, with her arms crossed. I let him finish. When he was done, I just nodded, walked over to the old lockbox, and placed it on the coffee table. I opened it. Inside, nestled among a few old photos, was the deed. I took it out and laid it on the table. Ethan stared at it, confused. "What's this?" "That," I said, my voice flat, "is a piece of land my grandmother left me. For the past 5 years, developers have been trying to buy it. The current offer is $15 million. The color drained from their faces. Tiffany's jaw actually dropped, her eyes flickering with a raw, greedy disbelief. Ethan looked from the deed to my face and back again, his mind scrambling. You're a millionaire?" he whispered. "I am," I replied calmly. "I have been for a while. Even when I was scrubbing toilets to pay for your college education. Even when you stole my life savings because your wife wanted new kitchen countertops." Tears started to well in Ethan's eyes. Mom, we didn't know. If we had known... If you had known what, Ethan? I cut him off, my voice finally turning to steel. You would have been nicer to me? You would have pretended to love me for my money instead of hating me for my poverty. You didn't come here today because you miss your mother. You came here because you need an ATM. You didn't want a relationship. You wanted a bailout. I picked up the deed and put it back in the box. The answer is no. You won't get a single penny. That $10,000 you stole was the most expensive lesson you'll ever learn. You chose this life. You chose her, I said, glancing at Tiffany. Now you get to live with the consequences. I asked them to leave, and for once, they did without a fight. The confrontation didn't leave me feeling triumphant or happy. It just left me feeling free. The crushing weight of my one-sided love and sacrifice was finally gone. The next week, I sold a small piece of the land, just enough to make sure I'd never have to worry about money again. I quit my cleaning jobs. I bought a modest but beautiful little house with a garden, and I started to travel. I saw the parts of the world I had only ever dreamed about. I took up painting, joined a book club, and made friends who liked me for me, not for what I could do for them. I was finally living my own life. As for Ethan and Tiffany, their world fell apart exactly as you'd expect. Without a safety net, Tiffany, who had never known a day of real hardship, couldn't handle it. She left Ethan within a month and went running back to her wealthy parents. Ethan was left completely alone, bankrupt and broken. He had to sell what little they had left and move into a tiny, run-down apartment, the same kind of place I started out in all those years ago. He had traded his mother's unconditional love for a woman's conditional affection, and in the end, he was left with nothing. He tried calling a few more times, leaving these long, rambling messages filled with apologies and regret. I never answered. It wasn't about getting revenge. It was about self-preservation. My love for my son had almost destroyed me, but my secret ended up saving me. I finally learned that the most important promise you can ever keep is the one you make to yourself. Family relationships can be so complicated, and sometimes setting a boundary is the hardest but most important thing you can do for yourself. Have you ever had to make a tough choice to protect your own peace within your family? I'd be interested to hear your story in the comments. Thank you for listening. My story is a painful reminder that the people we love the most can often hurt us the deepest. But it's also a story about resilience and about the quiet strength you find when you decide to reclaim your own life. Never, ever forget your own worth, and don't be afraid to finally choose yourself.